There we go. Okay, you ready?
Perfect.
All right. Well, we are live. This is our Common Mission Project Academic Advisory Board, getting ready for your fall quarter semester, getting for. So really happy to have David from CMU, Bernie from JMU, Rodrigo from MPS, and myself from Common Mission Project and the Rochester Institute of Technology. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, happy to be here.
Very happy to be here, Jim.
Thanks,
Great.
Jim. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, so I just want to, what we're going to be doing as we prepare for the fall semester is this is always tough, right? We've been teaching these programs, there's new things that we're trying to pick up on, and what I'm hoping that the faculty who are, veterans at Hacking 4 will pick up on some things, but a lot of new faculty. So we are welcoming, I think about 25 to 30 new faculty just in the United States itself, and we're going to have a lot more in the United Kingdom and Australia as we move forward with all of this. So what I'm thinking about in terms of what we can talk about today is go back to when you taught your first class and what were the things that you wish you had known, and what have you learned through your years of teaching this program and just your general education experience that I think will be helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on you gentlemen and go here. And Bernie, I'm going to go with you first because we have the distinct honor this semester of working with the state together and Hacking for Diplomacy. So this is really fun. We're going to have some shared like Slack space and different things for our students and things to collaborate. But Bernie, go back to when you started this program. What are things you wish you had known that now are incorporated? Yes.
Wow. I mean, I think when we started, that was into the fall of 2017, and I didn't know how truly life-changing that experience is for students. And I think at the beginning of the fall semester back then, I was still in that sort of orthodox traditional mindset of how do we grade.
Yeah.
And that sort of, and how do we assess? And now we've come a long way on proper, like, allow the students to reflect on how they're learning. And we created a portfolios type of assessment. But back that.
So Bernie, if I can add one thing in here. In the syllabus, Bernie and JMU were kind enough to include their portfolio grading as one of the options that we have in there. So if you look in the schemes, the portfolio grading approach, again, Bernie was kind enough to share that because when we've talked about it, it was really complex for me to understand. So you and Sean McCarthy were kind enough to provide that. So for our faculty members, we have 4 different suggestions on grading here, and the portfolio one. Bernie. So yeah, sorry about interrupting. I just want to highlight that we do have these in the syllabi there for faculty to consider for themselves as well.
Yeah, I guess for new faculty, it's like, don't worry about class. And the experience is very different, not just for the students, but for faculty too. So take it easy on those anxieties about assessment. We haven't covered, Jim, as you said, you kindly put that up for in the channel for faculty. And so you have to go with the flow, right? It's new territory for a lot of you guys now teaching that for the first time. So relax.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I'm going to ask you the same question. You've been teaching this program for a while now, and what you wish you had started with or known, or maybe that gave you anxiety that now you kind of realize just weren't big deals?
Oh, there's probably 1,000 things that I could talk about here, but I would say the first one that comes to mind that was a big mistake in the early goings was when we started this class, we knew that it was going to be very experiential based, very project oriented. And so from my bias, I was thinking, well, hey, we can just take everything that we do in our capstone process and just port it over to this class. It'll be perfect. Incorrect, very incorrect, because it's the problem that you're working on is quite different. So, to kind of give an overview, and if anybody out there does capstone projects, generally those are going to be given to students with really what we would be creating the MVP in mind, right? That they're going to go ahead and just take that MVP to the next level. Well, with this class, you're not starting with that, right? You're trying to figure out what that's going to be. And so there's a lot of steps that have to take place prior to that to figure out what that MVP is going to be. So in the early goings for us, we were thinking, well, we can just have them start to develop as soon as they learn about the problem and have a couple of conversations. Turns out that a lot of times that's just a big waste of time, right? That there's a lot more that needs to be sourced, a lot of information that needs to come out to really better apply that to what the new problem is going to be. I think that's one of the key terms that'll come up quite a bit is the new problem. That what comes to you at the beginning of the class is not really usually going to be what you end with as that problem. So that's one of my big takeaways is that this class formulated quite differently than other project-based or experiential-based learning classes.
No, I think those are absolutely some really good points there. So Rodrigo, I'm going to pick on you last on this one. The same thing. Now you teach a lot more, and I know, gentlemen, both of you do as well, than just Hacking 4. I'm probably the only person sitting here who very rarely teaches other classes at this point. But Rodrigo, lesson learned. What are the things that you wish you had known and that you've implemented because of the experiences you've had?
Yeah, I would say that in anybody who's going to be teaching an innovation class that is project based, and Hacking 4 would be the perfect example. But and where you're providing the Lean Launchpad model or some kind of model similar to that, where you're getting them out of the building, when you're getting them to do, you're getting students to do things that they're not comfortable doing, right? In ways that they're not used to doing before. If the only thing they've been doing is writing term papers and doing research at the library, right? So if that's the framework that they've had so far, it'll be uncomfortable. So one thing that I discovered, and I don't know if this has been the experience with you guys, is that when I would get the reviews for the final student opinion forms at the end of a class, for example, I would always notice these very bimodal kind of comments, right? Either it's the best thing ever happened to me and this class changed my life, right? Or I felt lost in the wilderness and I didn't know my way. And so there was always this. So what I found out is that it's not that the material is difficult, it's not, right? So teaching Lean is actually, I mean, from a theoretical perspective, this is not quantum physics, right? It's come with a value proposition, build some MVPs, find some critical stakeholders, listen to them, tweak and iterate and go back. So it's not difficult. It's emotionally challenging. And I would say that one mistake that I made at the beginning, and so probably I'm still making from time to time, is that as professors, we are geared towards working at the intellectual side of our students and not necessarily the emotional side. And a lot of success, I think, at the Hacking 4 world and environment comes from curating or helping scaffold the emotional roller coaster that a Lean Launchpad or a Hacking 4 project might be. Right? So I would say that building a class that is much more geared towards the emotional intelligence of the students has been something that has been part of the effort, and something that I would recommend to anybody who's going to be teaching this class for the first time. If you listen to your students saying, I'm confused, they're not confused about the material. The material is clear. It's not that complete. They are emotionally confused, and your role as mentor is going to be to, as much as you are teaching to their brain, is to prepare their not only their heart but their guts and everything else to what it means to go through this through this process.
Yeah, I would say that to add to that, students, yeah, I mean it's the strategy, the model, methodology is easy to grasp. I think it's hard for students sometimes to fully commit themselves to it,
Yes.
right? And that's what we got to continually bring back to them, and really go into detail of why it's so important for them to do particular things, right? To not shortcut, to not think that you already have the answer to the problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've seen this happen in class in the past. Sometimes you have to let them crash and burn a little bit too,
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Right, but at the same time, don't waste too much time, because as we know, time is very limited in a semester in trying to do one of these problems.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that I touch on there, David, and I've had this feedback. They're uncomfortable with the unknown. Because in a traditional class, you know what the outcome is typically going to look like, right? You're going to read this book, you're going to take these quizzes, take this test, write this paper. You kind of have a good framework for how this is all going to look. Well, a lot of uncertainty just kind of baked in, because that's how innovation and entrepreneurship really works in the real world. But I also think that it's getting students to start becoming more comfortable with the idea of the uncertainty and not knowing what the end looks like. early on, so there's not this consternation necessarily on their side where they're trying to figure out, like to your point, David, we wanted to start with a solution. No, that's not how this works. And one of the feedback I get from students, especially early on, is I don't know what the end's supposed to look like, and I don't like that. And that's like, they think of it as a criticism, but it's more of an actual like, well, good, you kind of get it. And I hope that by the end of this experience, you understand why I couldn't tell you what the end looks like, because I don't know. And I don't think any of us would have the hubris here to say we know what the end looks like. It's just, we may have an idea, and sometimes those ideas happen, but it's not like, I've never been right on what the ending is going to look like with these student projects.
Yeah, but at the same time too, having experience in this class allows you to sort of forecast a little bit better too.
A little bit, right? Yeah.
I feel like knowing the process better and having that experience, can at least start to send students into a particular direction that they may want to go to. Again, it may not be what the outcome is going to be. Again, the problem may change, but I definitely think that experience really helps. So anybody starting this class for the first time shouldn't get too frustrated. It does take some time and some experience.
Yeah, and that's one thing actually I think is a good point. And then Bernie, I see you have a thought there. We can help with providing, like, hey, did you try to talk to these people to try this thing or try that thing? It's just kind of going into our magic hat of, hey, we've experienced all these things in the past. So it does help you when you've got that experience. But for new faculty, to your point, David, don't be too worried about that. But use your experiences and things to your advantage, because your thoughts could add tremendous value to that student experience. So Bernie, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. I mean, on that emotional turmoil Rodrigo mentioned, I think if you're teaching that for the first time and you have a interdisciplinary class where you have several majors, I think one good thing would be for faculty to reassure that everybody is anxious right now. So I mean,
Yes.
if you have a problem on some geopolitical related topic, all the international affairs and poli-sci students might feel like, okay, this is our cup of tea, and the computer science and business students might feel like, oh, where am I? Am I in the right class? Where in week 3, when they realize it's a logistics problem, all the marketing and business students feel like, okay, this is our cup of tea. And then in week 4, it's actually a coding issue. All the computer science students like, okay, I think we are now in charge. So if you reassure that, I did that yesterday in our first class, because we have so many different majors, like those who feel now that they think they know it, you probably won't. This is based on interdisciplinary, leverage. And teamwork, and that's important, because you lose students, right? You lose potentially bright students, and quite the bright students are often the ones who are very critical and thinking maybe we can't do that. So that's something, that reassurance for that emotional turmoil Rodrigo mentioned, I think would be good at the beginning.
And Bernie, just connecting with what you're saying and David's saying, right? So the logistics folks will try to make this a logistics problem, and the computer science problems will try to make this a computer science problem, and thus will not commit to the build, measure, learn cycle to go where the data tells you to go, right? So part of this turmoil becomes that we are almost compelling students to get out of the area they think they know better, if that's what the data is telling them to do. So great point there, Stu.
Yeah, I love that too. And like just talking about like you have all these different majors and different kind of people in the room. And I typically have a lot of technical students and computing security too. So these are students that are typically much smarter than I could ever hope to be. But one of the things that I use is kind of like an icebreaker when they come into class, because they're going to get the problems and they're going to think, this is what I solve for, right? Here's the problem statement. I'm going to write the code or whatever it is to solve this. And I use this every, so we're going to watch this or whatever. I've used the same spiel for years. But if we're talking about a technical problem, say, I know you heard this too, I'm sorry, is if it was as simple as putting Linux on a Raspberry Pi and deploying it out to the units, the very bright minds in the government would have done this. And then I take a step, I look at the shock on their face thinking like, oh crap, this is not going to be easy. And then say, listen, the reason I tell you that is there's a tremendous number of very bright individuals that have been looking at this problem for a long time or experiencing it for a long time. If it was something very simple, they would have found a solution path to it, because they would have defined the problem. But because they haven't defined the problem really well, means that there's not a solution to be had. Investigation. And I think that's one of the ways that I try to listen. We're here to investigate and figure out what this is. You may end up being right. Maybe it was as simple as putting Linux on a Raspberry Pi. It could be a piece of it, right? Technology could be a piece of it, but whatever example you can use. Bernie, you've got a lot of political science majors, and whatever example you want to use in your classroom, but think about like how you can relate to them in saying, listen, what you're seeing is not black and white. And that can be a barrier for them sometimes, because typically I think tends to be, or has typically been, very black and white. This is not. This is all the colors, lots of gray, and a lot of anxiousness. So I think there's something to be said about that. On the next topic, anything else on there, gentlemen, that we want to say?
The only thing I would say, to leave on is just it's all about validation, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about there. And really, as the instructor, make sure that all the checks and balances are in place. Make sure the students are following those. Like you said, maybe what they're coming up with is a good fit, but you want to make sure you validate it from all perspectives, right? To everybody, all the stakeholders that are involved with that, beneficiaries, right? The scenarios, everything that's going to be that could be part of that solution, that could also be a part of the problem to that solution, needs to be validated.
Yeah. So I want to pivot back to something here that was kind of indirectly brought up. Bernie, you mentioned you started your class this week, and something that you've been really insightful on, and gentlemen, I know that you're going to have some good feedback here too, is the formation of the teams. This is something that we hear from new faculty all the time, and sometimes they're looking for what is the right way, but we all have different styles or different methods of kind of putting teams together. So Bernie, I'll start with you on this one, just because you've got some interesting ways that you've put this together. So what's anything that you've tried in the past that wasn't really great for your student populations?
We've used Strength Finder in the past. It's I think we had a subscription, or it's pretty cheap, educational subscription. The benefit with Strength Finder is that students themselves sort of see where their strengths and weaknesses are, right? So our idea was, we don't want to put 4 alpha females and alpha males in one group, and we want to mix and match their skills and of course also their disciplines. In the end, it proved too sophisticated for our needs, because it was helpful for the students, but in us putting together students, if everybody wanted that particular project and we needed sort of diversity in disciplines, we couldn't really do that either. But I think it's good for the students to see where they are, and it's quite a fun exercise for them to do. So what we do right now is we basically ask them to have we have a Google spreadsheet, and they put their preferences down, and we're trying to honor first and second choices for the students. What we did for the first time, which was quite fun this week, we gave them, asked them to summarize, we showed them the problems before we did anything else, show them the problems, and they had, the task was for them to, in layman's terms, describe to the rest of the class what that problem was about. And that was sort of introduction to those projects. And then what we did for the first time, we asked them, take out any identifier information from the Department of State and Diplomatic Security, and ask ChatGPT what the answer to that problem is. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that sort of showed them that ChatGPT in this course could be a helpful assistant, or it could be absolute nonsense, because whatever ChatGPT is producing is not. And we also, as you said, we reminded them that a lot of smart people in diplomatic security, and they also have access to ChatGPT. So that was sort of our first introduction to AI, and we will use it in different forms in the class. But the telling students, you can use it, it's an assistant who can be right or can be wrong. So that was sort of the first icebreaker for us. But really, again, Strength Finder is good, but sometimes it's too sophisticated if you have limited amount of students and certain set of different majors.
That's a really good one. So I know the AI one, Rodrigo, I want to come back to you on this, because we've had some good conversations here and some good suggestions on there. But David, team formation, what's working for you? What hasn't worked?
I mean, I probably go way above and beyond what I should do for team formation, but I think the first thing is I want to make sure that students are going to be happy on the things that they're going to be working on for the next 3 or 4 months, right? If they're not happy with the topic or what it might be, then they're just going to have a miserable time, and it's going to be hard to motivate them and things like that. So, one part of it is we do a problem ranking survey, and it kind of builds some other things too, like what Bernie's talking about. First thing obviously is which problem is most exciting to you, right? And then rank the problems. The second thing is kind of doing a little bit of like, Myers-Briggs sort of personality, kind of get an idea of like who the leaders versus followers, attendant versus not, those kinds of things, and really having a balance. The third thing is got to have a balance between graduate students and undergraduate students. That seems to be pretty important as well. You don't want to have a bunch of undergrads on the same team. I've seen some bad things with a incomplete balance there. And then doing some icebreaker stuff like Bernie's talking about. So we don't start until next Monday. That's our first class, but that'll be our introductory session. But what we also do is we do a experiential workshop. We'll do that next Friday, where we'll actually form teams out of the students and have them run through an exercise that I've been busy recruiting for, getting some folks to play stakeholder roles, and they'll actually go through the beneficiary discovery process with them. Now, these aren't going to be the teams that they're going to be on, but it's another opportunity for them to not just learn about the process, but also learn about their peers, right? Who they're going to be taking this class with. And maybe through some of these exercises and things, they'll figure out who they think they'll be very compatible with, that they'll be able to work with very well. And then finally, the following Monday, I bring the sponsors on a call and interact with the students and talk about the problem and, get them excited for what they're looking at. So lots of different things that I do over here, but it seems to really create good synergies with the teams when we do these things.
Yeah, that's a I've done every method you can imagine where a count off and that's your team. And I will say, I think my most successful team happened by that way, just accidentally. But what I've been trying to do is more take their consideration into account. And I've got a 50-50 between grad students and undergrads this semester. So it's definitely going to be trying to make sure that I have what they're interested in, because this is more like they're looking at what they can do for a thesis or a capstone, not a capstone, excuse me, the graduate students, but a thesis that they could be doing and finding some synergistic energies there. But David, I also do the same thing where actually for my first sponsors come in and pitch the problems to the students, and that kind of gets them excited. And I've seen that at least anecdotally in RIT as being a really good opportunity for a retention tool, because when the students get to see how excited these individuals are about their problem, the type of people, I mean, when you have like Undersecretary Lacey coming in and discussing the problems and the value that you're adding into the department, I mean, these students are thinking like, wow, this is something I've never seen before, this kind of opportunities. That's wonderful there. So Magda, welcome. We're talking about right in this part, Rodrigo, I want to get into the AI bit there with you, and I think we're going to have a good conversation here. But Magda, in putting your student teams together, what's worked for you? What hasn't worked? What would you recommend to some new, how they could align their student team?
Good morning, first of all, and sorry.
Yes, good morning. Sorry.
I kind of like what David said so far. Definitely, those are some great strategies. Every semester we find some things that we didn't know before, but providing the students an opportunity to meet each other and see that they are compatible. In previous semesters, we will rush into forming teams early. For the reason is we want to be able to give the teams as much time as they can to interact and do the customer discovery. And having done this now for several semesters, I do recognize the value of taking that slower, allowing the teams, the students to meet each other, to discuss a little bit more the projects, interact with the sponsors, and not try to rush. In the past, I believe that the topic was the most important thing. But the topic, when you share it on a one-pager, provides some information to the students. I think the other ingredients are the sponsor and the people they are going to work with that will make it exciting for them. So those are some of the things that I have noticed.
Yeah, so I guess the good takeaway here is there is no one size fits all. Use what you're kind of good here. So Rodrigo, please.
No, I that was what I was going to say too, Jim. So you're right. What this showcases for any new faculty who might be listening to us is that I hate the American idiom. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I don't know why would you want to do that, but you know what we're saying. We say in Spanish, there's more than one way to blow up a candle, and I think that's more appropriate, right? But whatever you want to use as idiom, right?
It's a better visual.
I think so, right? So that one and the bath water and the baby one, that one also triggers me. But so just saying here that you as faculty get to decide what is the best approach that you can follow, both from a point of view of theory, right? Is there any theory in your area of expertise that you want to apply and use? I bring effectuation into my classroom, in part because I believe so. Effectuation is another innovation theory that some of our folks might be familiar with. They have this thing called the birding handler principle after following thousands of serial entrepreneurs. And what they have found is that entrepreneurs actually are very cognizant of what they bring into the venture, whatever that is, right? So that it's a myth that entrepreneurs start with a goal and then they just work relentlessly to it, which is kind of how we imagine strategy to happen. Instead, most of the time, entrepreneurs actually start with means. They know what they have and they will decide the vector of the venture that they have based on what they have access to, right? So I ask my students, right, so who they are, what they know, and who they know, right? And they make an inventory, right? And based on those three principles, the person I am, so the stuff that I know how to do myself, the person that and then the people I know, I let them form a team that is compatible to what they said. Like Bernie and Dave, they mentioned, you too, Jim. I do try to bring the sponsors at the beginning and try to showcase what some of the importance is. That can cut in two directions, right? Because the sponsors can sometimes direct the teams to a solution that they already have in mind, and then part of the challenge is to reel that back and remind them that they are in the customer discovery process and the sponsor is just one more input among the series of inputs that they'll have to get. But yeah, ultimately, if you're a faculty who's going to be starting a Hacking for Defense class this semester for the first time, build, measure, learn, you're getting it wrong, right? So you will get it wrong a few times. You are gonna try to find what works for you if you've never done it before. And every new cohort of students brings a new formula, and humans are difficult and marvelous and complicated, and sometimes teams work and sometimes they'll implode like a collapsing red giant star, right? So in both cases, your job as an instructor, I would say, is to bring the lessons learned so they can carry some experience with successes and failures to the next phase of their life after the class is over.
Yeah, I think we've all had the teams that have imploded or things like that. But right, so Bernie, you brought up an interesting point with AI, and this is something that I with in particular with my white paper, because I wasn't sophisticated enough thinking about using it as a testing business ideas, going to like the Alex Osterwalder idea. And Rodrigo, this is something that you've kind of become like an expert in over the last 8 or so months, and it's been really fascinating to see the way that you've kind of used the tool for some of these things. So for faculty who are thinking, Rodrigo, how could my students use this in a way that's propel their learning? What recommendations do you have about using something like ChatGPT or Bard or something similar to that?
Yeah. So first of all, I teach now a lab, an 8 hours lab on this topic. So I'll try to be brief in 30 seconds. The first thing that I'll say is most students are using it wrongly, right? So most students are using AI wrongly because you just started, right? Because it's a tool that became available to us for generative AI, text-based. Basically, it entered the site has in December 2022 for graphic creation for image. That was a little earlier in September with Midjourney and DALL-E, right? So this is just, so the ripple effects of this technology are just percolating. Most people are using it wrong, throwing a single question, getting a single output, not iterating, not working together. What I'll say is, we don't get, and this is beyond just Hacking 4, just in general, and not only for faculty, but also for students, we don't get to ignore it, we don't get to not know how it is, and we don't need to develop literacy around AI. This is a new tool, it's a very important one. What I tell students, think of it as a staff, that you direct, right? If you're the producer, if you're Christopher Nolan putting Oppenheimer together, you have cinematographers and you have script writers and you give them orders and you see the product and either you like it or not and you say you completely missed the mark and you send them back to work again, right? That's how you should think about AI. You go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or P.ai or whatever AI that you're using, and there are many. So finding what the differences are and what the uses of each of these, the difference between the GPT-3 model versus GPT-4, GPT models versus ChatGPT, right? One is just a product, the other is the foundations. So all of these are things our students need to get more literacy. And when we get good at it, what we do is that we actually start to iterate with it, right? You produce something, the human produces something, you go to the machine, complex prompts can be 2-3 pages long, right? It's not a single thing. It's almost as difficult as writing the essay, right? And then you go back and you tweak and you modify. When you do it right, you get amazing results, right? You get things that you didn't know because what you're getting is your own creativity and imagination reflected on the tool, reflected back at you, and you change it back again. When you use it poorly, which is what a lot of lazy undergrad students are doing, entering the rules of the essay, but what you get is really cheesy results that sound like ChatGPT and that in no way are performing at the level that you would expect a good essay. So the challenge here is really for students to understand that this is something they'll need literacy, and us as faculty, we better get right fast into how we can train them and be good at it.
Yes, I'm curious. Anybody else? I mean, I can talk about mine a little bit, but Bernie, I love the idea there. Like, what does ChatGPT tell you the solution is? And I think that's like a great starting point. Do you have any plans on how you may like further use it, or are you not really going to be using it? Are there any ideas on how you might think students or faculty should encourage their students to use these types of generative AI tools?
I think very much like what Rodrigo said. I mean, I should highlight that my colleague Carla, my math professor colleague, she wrote a book on AI. So I totally defer that part to her and the course. So I would not, want to provide any advice on that. And it will be the first time we'll be doing it. But it's exactly what, we told the students 2 days ago, it's an assistant, and the assistant can bring you good information or bad information. And like Rodrigo said, you send them back to, so it's the ideas of bouncing off ideas and testing what sort of product you have come up with, and rather than trying to find the solution from the onset. That's why we've done that sort of exercise with them. But we show them the limitations, but also the potential of it. Some of them were really good. Some of them, like, this was a good beginning of where we could go and provided some more flesh to the project. But it may have also been misrepresented, that project, because we have not talked to the problem sponsors yet, right? So we're still in the problem discovery phase.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, please go ahead, Magda.
Jim, I wanted to add to that because yesterday I am part of the Southwest ICOR Hub. And yesterday we were running a program and one of our collaborators mentioned this, and I kind of liked it. His point was that we are running a lean launch methodology in the Hacking for Defense also. So students have to go out and find people beyond the 10 or 15 contacts. So his recommendation was use ChatGPT to develop an email that is specific to that particular person that you're trying to reach and get him to respond, and then use ChatGPT to generate good questions. And I think along the lines of what Rodrigo said is, in order to get something that is really good, you have to invest some time on what is the prompt you're giving. And I never thought about using that in that fashion. So I know we are running some classes, we're running the ICOR program. So I am going to test it. I just thought it was a unique way of thinking about it for our programs.
No, absolutely. Is there anything going on in your classes?
I mean, I like what I'm hearing with some of the examples and some of the ideas. For me, I'm approaching a tool like this like I do with other classes, in the sense that, this is another instrument that you can use. But when you're using this instrument, don't just trust that the input that you're putting in is going to give you good output, right? It's kind of like, a complex calculator or something. If you're going to, put a formula in, you better know the underlying way of what you're trying to put together there, so you can validate the output that's coming out. Anything that you get from ChatGPT, don't just trust it at face value. I think this has been a common theme this year, right? Don't be lazy with it. That's been mentioned as well. But there's a lot of good things that you can use it for, right? Not just maybe things with the interview process or that. You can have it create outlines for you, help you with your presentations, things like that, which are all really good time savers. But when you're doing it for specific research-based stuff, this is where I kind of get a little trepidation with the tool, where I want to make sure that they do their own due diligence in the output that they're getting and not just trusting it at face value.
Trust
I
but
think
verify.
it's a great point, Dave, and that's something that should be said. The first, after December 2022, when the product comes to market, the first use that a lot of people use start to replace Google, right, and start making search and tell me and that's a terrible mistake. These things are not factual, right? They're made to sound factual, but they're not factual, and this is something that has to be understood about the underlying logic of how large language models work. Things can sound plausible and be full of BS, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, Dave, this is not a research tool. I mean, you can use it for research. This is a provocateur for your imagination, right? This is a tool that you can go and bounce ideas and try to get stuff, but you are completely right that students should be very clear that the output that comes out of these models, for reasons that go to the way the math works underlying the large language models, might be completely and utterly fake if what you're trying is to ask them the date in which World War II ended, right? They might be right, they might be wrong, you might get it wrong. So now
I think what you're saying there is like so important in terms of understanding sort of the context of the output that you're getting, that you don't hear a voice, you don't hear things like, skirting around the topic or I'm not sure or something like that. Generally, like it's going to come at you as this is fact, right? And it's easy
moral
to
authority.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, if you ever had somebody who is very sure of themselves and can say the most nonsense, but still says it with an incredible authority, that's ChatGPT.
I think we saw that with one of the Republican candidates this week.
I think we could put that with almost any politician, so we could be safe there. But I think one more thing on the AI thing that I'll add, and Rodrigo, this is something that you've mentioned to me, so I take no credit for this. But one of the ideas I think you can have with this is even later on, is as the students are testing hypotheses, is they can come back with that information, they can toss that in the ChatGPT and say, well, what would a next step look like? What would it look like after I have a bunch of interviews by putting some information in there and looking for key saturation points and looking for information that is going to be able to derive them in certain directions. So I am looking at this kind of tool as a research buddy. It's somebody who's providing direction, but not necessarily that we say that we have to still validate, right? It's not, and I mean, listen, if anybody who's gone and played with these tools gets an output for a paper, it reads like a machine still. It takes a lot of work and sophisticated work to make these things sound like a human being, I think. So, and it's something that we as faculty have to watch out for too, but it's something to be aware of is that, this is a good in this class. We're not writing papers necessarily, but using it as an assist, as a boost, as a way of going and saying, oh, let me try this direction, and come back with validations. I think there's value in this program to do that.
Here is a test that I ask for my students to know if they're using the tool effectively or not, right? So, and this is something that for computer science guys will be very, very understandable, right? A computer science coder, right? Code is language, right? We call them language, computer languages, right? So code is language. English is language, right? So when you are writing code for a computer, what you do is that you write the code, and God bless the fact that I haven't had to do that since my undergrad days, but you write the code, and I could find my way around Java and Python as a computer scientist, so I'm as a political scientist, so I'm very proud of that. So you write it, and you run the code in a compiler, right, and you get the output, and you see if there's bugs, often there are, you have to tweak it, and then you go back. So there is this constant bimodal way of writing computer code. You write the code, you run it, you see the result, you see where it fails, it's doing what I wanted or no, you go back, you fix the code, you do it again. Now we get to do that with natural language. You write the prompt, you get an output, you run it through ChatGPT, you get it. It's not going where you were. You go back, tweak the prompt. So if you don't have this bimodal way of working where you run, then you're not doing it right, right? And computer scientists will zero on this immediately because it'll feel very natural. Whereas for us who write in the social sciences, directly our text is our output, we will have to recalibrate and write more like computer scientists, right? So this is one of the things that is going to be different for those who come from the humanities or liberal arts side of the equation, that now we have to compile our text and run the code and see how it looks, even if it's written in English.
I like that example.
Yeah,
I like
me
that
too.
example. Can I give you one from engineering? I used to teach
Please.
finite element analysis and tools. And I used to tell the students, garbage in, garbage out. But if you use a powerful tool and you present those data and you present them with confidence without understanding that this is totally, totally unacceptable, you become dangerous.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I would like to remind the students the same way is, like what you said, it's a tool, but unless you have a foundation that you can check and validate what you're getting out of the tool, then either you become ridiculous because people understand it, or become dangerous because now people will believe you and run with that.
Yes.
So anyway,
that's a good
that's my
point.
2 cents.
No, that's a. Okay, we could again. It seems like I think we're gonna have to have another one of these conversations about some of this generative AI later on this semester about our experiences. But I want to, with the last few minutes, last about 10 minutes we have on the live stream, I want to kind of get back into the classroom experience. And one of the things that we've talked about in here before is feedback. And I just want to, I think with new faculty in particular, this is can be a difficult space for them to kind of jump into. And I would just be curious in terms of feedback. Do you have any suggestions that you would offer new faculty on what to do, just to be present in this environment because it is so dramatically different? So, David, can I start with you on that one? Do you have any if you could give your elevator pitch on feedback, what would you recommend to faculty?
Early and often. That would be the key, really. We do a couple of different things for feedback. 3 different things that we'll do in the class. One is going to be really having a classroom setting where you'll have a little bit of lecture, but you'll also do some hands-on work with the components that we're learning for that week, right? So whether it might be something in the MMC, VPC, et cetera, that we're going to work through that a little bit. We're going to look at examples. We're going to see see how the students approach that and kind of give them feedback on that. The second thing that we'll do is, since they're working on real-world projects, we'll want to have scrums with them as a team, right, and kind of understand how they're taking what they're learning in the classroom the first time and applying that to their projects, and have some one-on-one sessions to do that. And then finally, the third one is, their opportunity to be customer-facing, right? That they're going to do outbriefs, they're going to do midterm and final presentations, and they're going to pitch their ideas, talk about how they got there, get feedback from everybody that's on that call, right? So now we're kind of, getting more external input as well, and doing that in that third class. So three main ways that we're going to try to get feedback back to the students early, often, and as much as we possibly can.
No, absolutely. Magda, do you have any, in terms of feedback, what any recommendations you have there?
I think what we have used some of the things that David mentioned. We have used peer feedback, so we will use Google Forms for every time they do a presentation. Every student will provide feedback, and then we share that anonymously with all the students. One of the points that I would like to add, which is not only just on the feedback, is because we're dealing with engineering students, it's easy for them to forget the business model canvas and all the 9 elements. And I intentionally want to bring that every so often, maybe every 2 weeks, when we talk about where does this fit in where you are right now. Because in their focus is, I'm building something. I want an MVP. That's what I care about. And yeah, we're not going to launch a company at the end of the semester, but how can I make them step back and see, where does this fit into the 9 elements? Where are you? And don't ignore those. Those are going to be important for you. But those are some of the comments.
No, I think that's a really good one. I mean, I actually, even though I know these definitions, I have my remark with the PDFs of the definitions and the boxes, and as they're presenting, I stop them. All right, you have this here. Can you explain what's supposed to be in that box to me? And I do that even if I think they're right sometimes, just to make sure that I'm iterating on the material, that they're reinforcing the material. So I think that's I agree with you, is that needs to be the premise of everything, and asking and challenging the students. And that's a good point. I'm an advocate of, I like to keep them on their feet. They don't get through a 10-minute presentation. It takes 15, 20, 30 minutes sometimes, because I'm going to interrupt them. I'm going to ask some questions along the way, and I'm going to go back and challenge them. And I think, to your point, early and often, I've seen lots of different feedback models, but I think one that I've seen students have the most difficulty with is you watch their presentation, you take notes, and then you provide feedback at the end. It can be a little bit disorienting because you're not in the moment. You're maybe not able to take down the notes that you need sometimes. So it's kind of knowing what you have available with your else like that. But I've tried multiple methods for my students. I've even asked them, do you like when I'm throwing darts, or do you like me to wait? And they're like, throw darts. We like it because it challenges them in that moment. Again, not saying it's right. It's worked for my students. Bernie, what about feedback in your classroom?
I think to those starting off, like for the first time, I'd say forget about assessment, right? We had very sophisticated Google spreadsheets on how we assess them on each presentation, and that was the feedback, and we totally discarded that. So CMP put the learning record, which we are using now for everyone to share, and I highly recommend that, or another form of alternative assessment, right? What we do, again, coming out, try to get some sort of tips on first week for new faculty. We use the Stanford wallet exercise, and that's sort of a really good introduction to design thinking, and it sort of sets the tone for the class. Everybody knows that this is a different type of class. Social scientists, computer science students, from humanities, everybody knows this is different, and it shows students that the core element of this course, which is that it has to be client focused. That instructors now feedback, we can be wrong too. We can, sometimes get carried away and by our own discipline and own sort of, perspectives, that the feedback we're giving is wrong because the client, it doesn't fix the problem, what we think. So that's important. I like that it's a very easy exercise. It comes with instructor guide. You can download it from the D school at Stanford. Very, very good first exercise, which sort of provides the nature of this course, design thinking, lean launchpad, but also the feedback element, that are you working on something the client wants, or are you working on something that you really like as a product? And throughout this is the feedback. The beginning, I think instructors have to be mindful that you have to drill the methodology of the value proposition canvas. Remind them of it. Are you actually doing that? Are you adhering to the value proposition canvas? In the first couple of weeks, that sort of feedback I found the most valuable, because it gives them the tools, the skill set, and they realize that this is client focused. And it's a very, very new experience for a lot of undergrads, right? And it's a lot of new experience for a lot of faculty who've never done any course like that.
Absolutely.
So that's the important part of feedback in the early stages.
Absolutely. And Rodrigo, anything on feedback there?
Yeah, I subscribe everything that has been said here. I particularly appreciate the idea of the assessment part is much less important, and in this case, the real importance is to activate the mentorship. One thing that I would say that hasn't been mentioned is that know thyself, right? So know yourself personally as an instructor, and see where your strengths and weaknesses are providing feedback. You mentioned it right here, so be very careful not to provide feedback that it's a leading question, right? And it's easy to do that because we might want to assess the future of what we are listening to. And the reality is that you know as little as the students about what will later on be validated by the beneficiaries, right? So it's important to be a guide on the method, not necessarily on the output. And if that means that sometimes you tell, I just happened to meet with a team, I said, I think you're gonna crash and burn when you present this, right? But I might be wrong, so I just show me the data that makes you think that you think this is the right approach. And they did crash and burn, by the way. So I was right on that one, but I might not have been right. So ultimately, they had the data, they had their information, they presented to the sponsor, they ran some, and it didn't work the way I thought it wouldn't. But so here is very important to remember that we, at least I tell students, we grade on the method, not on the output. What we want to see is a good application of the Lean Launchpad Hacking 4 methodology, and that might actually mean that at the end you don't find product mission fit, and you say we didn't. Well, that's a win too.
Yeah, Rodrigo, you and I just spoke with Alex Osterwalder, and there'll be a podcast coming out with him soon. But this is like a portfolio approach. Failure is not a bad thing, and I know that a lot of students that are coming in have been taught their whole life is a four-letter word, and it's simply not. Knowing that something is not true in this environment is sometimes as equally or more important than knowing what is true, what is good. So that's a tough lesson for them to sometimes swallow, and I think even as faculty sometimes.
And for us, it's hard for us not to start judging teams' performance on the level of progress. You'll have the star team, and they're doing amazingly, and they're coming with the third version of their MVP, and the thing is sexy and has LEDs that blink and all the funky stuff. Right, and then you have another team that it's in their third pivot and they're getting nowhere, and it's very easy to think that the first team is doing better than the second, and that might not be true, right? Exactly. Actually, that might not be true at all. But as a faculty, you do have to recalibrate, in this case, what success in the class looks like, which is a following a specific process to achieve validated learning, right? It's not the MVP, right?
Yeah, and I think that's those points. So for everybody listening, watching, is the people on our board are, in my mind, some of the best H4 faculty in the world. And they've gone through and made every mistake that you can possibly make in the classroom and see everything here. So, and done a lot of good things, and we're still learning. So I think that's a big point here. I don't call myself an expert in this. I think I'm one of the better ones, but I'm learning something new every semester. And every time I have interaction with a different faculty member, I was teaching at Sandhurst this summer. I learned a lot of new things there that really informed the way that we can do these programs. But what I want to close this out on is not so much a roundtable thing, but I just want to let all the this. One of the things that Comm Mission Project does for Hacking 4 is provide as much framework material as possible. So if you visit commmission.us and take a look at the educator resource tab, we've worked tirelessly, and I do mean that, with our team to put out concept lectures. So there are 7 recorded concept lectures that, unfortunately, you have to look at me, but it goes through the 7 concepts that make up H4. We also have less learning that you can find in the H4 toolkit. We have all the course slides, examples, you name it, it's there. And I think one of the things that I would suggest to new faculty is don't do this by yourself. I remember I reached out to faculty who had taught this program. I've continued to do that. I'm going to ask some of these folks that are on the panel today to join me in class. I bring in different faculty members. I bring in different perspectives, and I'm constantly learning something new. So I think this is one of those places where a lot of your preconceived notions on what a class should look like have to kind of get thrown out. Bernie, to use a term that you used in a previous live stream, was this is an egalitarian process. And we have to know that at the start. If you think it's anything other than that, that's a trap that you're probably setting for yourself. So the last thing I'll add here is we have gone through this. I have faculty who call me every semester multiple times, commiserate, ask questions. Hey, I've experienced this. This happened. What do I do? And chances are pretty good that if it's not me, then somebody that I have very close access to is going to experience the same thing. So don't be an island. I kind of always compare like being an H4 faculty to being one of the Hawaiian Islands, and you run out of spam. It's just a quick flight to the next island that's going to have that supply, and see, I'll help you out. What do you need? And you'll get them back the next time. This is how this works. And again, to faculty sharing their grading schemes, like Bernie and JMU did, to just sharing with the folks who are watching. So I just want to thank all of you for joining today for this live stream and getting ready for the fall fall semester. This is going to be valuable regardless, but if you have any questions, please visit us at the commmission.us. Take a look at those the educator resources tab. It is what I like to call band in a box. You can go ahead and get this program started once you've had the appropriate educators course training, and we're glad to help facilitate that from Comm Mission's perspective and get you the resources you need. So Bernie, Rodrigo, David, Magda, thank you so much. And for everyone who's watching or will watch, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Excited for the fall.
Excited for the fall.